Good morning. It's good to see y'all this morning. Am I on now? Jim told me a story about a preacher that put his lapel mic too low, and I was just making sure I hadn't made that mistake. Jim said about halfway through the sermon, he had to walk up there in front of the whole congregation and lift it up for him. I can just imagine the look in that preacher's eyes as, halfway through the lesson. He probably was pretty happy. He's like, man, look at that. I ain't got through the whole lesson. I've already got somebody to respond. That's pretty good stuff right there. Well, it's good to see y'all. We have survived another year of VBS. It was a tremendous event, y'all. We had, as far as kids go, we had probably more kids attend this year's event than we have in a couple years, just kids alone. That was pretty impressive. So with that, thank you to everybody that served in any role that had to do with that to make it successful. We appreciate that. And those who gave of their means to help get the things needed to pull that off. Now, I will say this, and I'll say it again. We'll say it again when we get to the worship service. Now that VBS is over, now we turn over to Trunk or Treat / Fall Festival. And so anybody who would love to help out with that, you just let me know. We'll start planning for that in about 2 weeks. So, hey, let me tell you something. If we can get cool weather in October in South Georgia, it will not be the weekend of the Georgia-Florida game, I can tell you that. Unless we can get a 70-inch out here somewhere at the TV where we can all watch it as we do our various tasks and activities. Anyway, well, it's time to start. If y'all will pray with me, we'll get going. Heavenly Father, Lord, we're grateful for another day. We're grateful for you allowing us to wake up to take breath, Lord, and grateful for just all the many blessings that we have, Lord. We ask you as we enter into this study today that we'll listen and we'll meditate on the things from your word, the principles and the lessons that we can learn and apply them to our lives. Thank you for the ability and the opportunity, Lord, that we can learn more about you and grow in our relationship with you in your Son's name. Amen. So, last week we didn't get completely done with last week's lesson, and we were on the Nazirite vow. And so I want to finish that up this week, and then we'll move on to lesson 3. And so we were on the Nazirite vow, and so I'm going to kind of skim through it because I cannot remember everything that we covered, and we didn't because I didn't have a pen with me and I didn't mark it, and then VBS happened, and I forgot about everything. So let's go through. So in chapter 6 of Leviticus, we start to talk about this Nazirite vow. And did I say Leviticus? Numbers. I'm sorry. Yeah, y'all can see where my head's at today. And so we know that the regulations for that pertain to either a man or a woman in chapter 6 and verse 1. And it was someone who wanted to be separated to the Lord for a period of time. Now, the decision to take the Nazirite vow was voluntary. It was a voluntary decision. The Nazirite vow had a couple of requirements, things that you could not do. So the Nazirite could not touch anything produced from the grapevine, whether it be a drink, cake, or jelly, could not cut their hair, could not have contact with the dead, regardless of whom had died, including family. So if you were in the midst of this vow, your mom dies, your dad dies, you can't have contact, sorry. You're going to have to, mourn from a distance, so to speak. And that's pretty harsh, but yes, ma'am. Yes. All right, so you had various periods of time. So if you look at someone like Samson, his was a lifelong commitment. And technically, his mother volunteered him. But there were other times. I'm going to take this vow for a year. I'm going to take this for 6 months. I'm going to take it for 8 months. What you would do is, being voluntary, you would go and you would set the time frame. And then under that time frame, this is the requirements. Just what you can't do. during this period, that individual was holy to the Lord. Now, we've looked at that word holy. We know that word means what? Separate. You were separate to the Lord. Thomas Whitelaw wrote about this. He said, he who was a holy ambition to please God must devote to God the whole forces of his being. Undiminished by any want and use of the world, he must abstain not only from pleasures which are actually dangerous, but from such as have any savor of moral evil about them. He must subordinate his most sacred private feelings to the great purpose of his life. And so when I look at that and I hear that, and I'm thinking about the context of this vow and how deep it went, essentially I just got to sacrifice myself, right? That's essentially what it is. And when I think about how I'm to love God, I love God with everything in my being, right? And to love God the way He requires and He demands, does that mean I got to sacrifice? Yeah. It means I got to sacrifice, y'all. It means that I might have to do away with some relationships that the kids like to use this word today called toxic. Okay? I might have to just separate myself from some people and from some things. It might mean that there's a career that I'm in a job that I am, and it just pulls me so far away from God in my relationship that I might have to find something else to do if we're serious about it, right? And so the whole idea here is whatever the length of time of this vow, you are saying, God, it is about you. And the things that might pull me away from you, I'm distancing myself from that. Now, the proof's in the pudding, ain't it? Are you actually going to do it? The classical example of the Nazirite vow was Samson. And if you read his story, here's a guy that did not take himself out of situations that would pull himself down and away from God. Matter of fact, if we're very honest about his relationship with God, he sought out the evil influences. And there's a lot of people that look at his life, and it's kind of a paradox and a question mark, because in Hebrews 11 is he listed amongst those who showed great faith. Yes, he is. And so how do we reconcile the life that you read about in Judges? I believe that's chapters 13 through 16. How do you reconcile the life that he lived, and then he's mentioned in Hebrews 11 alongside Abraham and Noah and so many various other people that we prop up in the faith, right? How can he do it? Well, I think the answer is, and Jesus had a couple of parables about this, it's not how it begins, it's how it ends. And it was at the end where he showed tremendous faith. But it took a lifelong of a lot of mistakes to get there. And so, that's very reminiscent of a lot of people today, right? Does everybody just come to the Lord right when they come to that age of accountability? No. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes we get so stubborn, so prideful, you fill in the blank of the things that we let get in the way of doing what we should do and being in the relationship we should be in with God, that it takes time. And sometimes it takes a lot of struggle and a lot of heartache to soften us up to the point to understand that we need Him. And so with it, this was the purpose, and this is who they were supposed to be. And so the law made provisions for the accidental violation of the vow in the event that someone died suddenly, bringing the Nazirite into contact with the dead. The Nazirite was defiled. He had to shave the head on the day of his cleansing, the seventh day. Verse 9, on the eighth day he brought a sacrifice of 2 turtle doves or two pigeons, one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering. He brought a lamb of the first year for a trespass offering. All the days of the vow which he had kept before coming into contact with the dead were lost from his vow. So in other words, if you had taken this vow for a year, and you're in the 8th month of that vow, and you're in a situation in which someone has a heart attack or something, instantaneous death, and you can't do anything to get away from it, then are you still defiled, as it would be? Yes. Yes. Was it out of your control? Yes. But have you still been around a dead body? Yes. And so essentially what this is saying is that whole time frame started over. Even though you had 8 months in, you don't get to reset and then go 2 months and you're done. No. You got to start back over from the very beginning. And now you go back and you start your year. Now, some people might say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem fair. Well, is God a respecter of persons? No, this is just what it is. And sometimes we have circumstances that are just not up to our liking. This morning, Miss Tammy brought Wyatt up to me, had a question. Why did God create mosquitoes? Now, everybody who's ever lived in South Georgia has probably asked that same question, correct? There's a purpose. There's a reason. My thoughts on that is mosquitoes serve as food for dragonflies. So, if you ever watched The Lion King, which I have a number of times, especially since having kids, there's a circle of life, Elton John said, and they serve a purpose. All right, let's finish this up so we get into the next lesson. So when the days of his vow were fulfilled, he came to the tabernacle with a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, a ewe lamb of the first year for a sin offering, and a ram without blemish for a peace offering. He also brought a meal and drink offering. The priest sacrificed them to the Lord. Then the Nazarite shaved the hair of his separation and put it in the fire of the sacrifice of the peace offerings. A portion of the sacrifices was given to the Nazarite, and a portion was kept by the priest. Verses 19 and 20. After this ceremony, the Nazarite would again eat the grape and its fruits, shave his head, and have contact with the dead on the same conditions as the other Israelites that they could. For the laws pertaining to contact with the dead. And then to finish out chapter 6, we get the priestly blessing. The Lord instructed the priest in pronouncing blessings upon the children of Israel. The blessing states that God will bless his people, keep his people, and be gracious to them. All right? Now that was a reminder, that priestly blessing, that God would always bless his people. Y'all, somebody once said that if you tell someone the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, will they believe it? I tend to believe it. Now sometimes it's the other way. It's not just the good things, right? We tell our kids every day, I love you, right? I love you. We want them to believe and we want them to know that we love them. But, there are other people who've used that same kind of tactic to spread truth and lies and those type of things. God had told his people that if you do this, if you stay holy, if you stay separate, if you do what I tell you to do, I am going to bless you. Do you think they believed it? I don't like to use the aggregate like absolutism, like it just is just I believe some did. I believe absolutely some did, because even when you get to Judges, there's always a group of people in that cycle that get it right? Now, it took a lot to get them to get there, but they get there. Probably far more that didn't. And so you always see throughout the early part of the Old Testament, Jesus just keeps telling them, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bless you. And through this point that we're at now, has he done that? Is there tangible evidence that he's following through with what he said he's going to do? Yeah, of course. You relay that to where we're at today. What does he say to us? Are we a blessed people? Absolutely we are. We're going to talk about that a little bit later this morning. We get to worship this morning. But we got to believe it too. And I think to a certain extent, sometimes we can look past the blessings because we don't get it exactly the way we want it. You're blessing me and you're giving me things, but you're not giving it to me the way per my specifics. Okay? Thank you for this food that you're giving me, but I really don't like that food. Miss Cindy, you got your hand up? I'm sorry? The purpose of shaving their heads? Somebody else say something? Well, there's something that's been said in a commentary before about the whole completion, about starting and ending. You know, you think, well, outside of, me, I mean, I can't really start anymore, especially on the top. But, of the whole idea of that. But that's a good question. We can look into that deeper, and if there's something different to that, we can talk about that next week at the very beginning. Lesson 3. So the closing events at Mount Sinai. So in chapter 7, and this area covers chapter 7 through chapter 10 of Numbers, what we get to, we get an offering of the princes. And so I'm not going to read all 89 verses to y'all. Okay, you can go back and read that. The bringing of the offerings from the princes from the 12 tribes occurred on the day that the tabernacle was set up. The princes are those men of chapter 1, verses 5 through 16, who were acting representatively for the tribe. So this would be one person for each tribe. So 12. And they brought 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen. These were distributed amongst the Levites for use in transporting the tabernacle. 2 wagons and 4 oxen were given to the sons of Gershon, who transported the coverings over the tabernacle and the curtains on the outside. So these 4 carts and 8 oxen, okay, that's going to be the most given to each of these 3 groups. We looked at, I think it was last week, we looked at the 3 different groups. You had Merari, the sons of Merari, the sons of Gershon, and the sons of Kohath. And so you had these 3 groups within the tribe of Levi. And so their purpose is to move the tabernacle everywhere they went. And so the responsibilities for the Merarites here, they had to carry the heaviest objects connected to the tabernacle. Okay, the heaviest thing. So they required more carts and more oxen. And then he goes on to say here, 2 wagons and 4 oxen were given to the sons of Gershon, who transported the coverings over the tabernacle and the curtains on the outside. 4 wagons. Did I get out of place here? 4 wagons and 8 oxen were given to the Merarites, who transported the boards, bars, pillars, sockets of the tabernacle. The Kohathites were not given any wagons because they were required to bear the furniture of the tabernacle on their shoulders. Whew! I would dare say that the Kohathites were probably in more shape than the other 2 groups. Now, what's interesting about this is, when we look at the breakdown here, so it seems pretty fair. 4 carts, 8 oxen to the Merarites because they got to carry the heaviest stuff. 2 carts and 4 oxen to the sons of Gershon. They're carrying the lighter coverings of the tabernacle. And then no carts for the sons of Kohath because they were responsible for transporting the holiest objects in the tabernacle. They were carried on their shoulders by poles. Okay, and so what's interesting about this, there's a point of the, and then I'm sorry, I'll get in my mind when I read stuff, I have to write down questions because I get questions. There is something that happened in regards to David that has always stuck with me, and I cannot figure it out, and that is when someone died tragically, when they seem to be doing a good thing. So in 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verses 6 and 7, this is what it says. And when they had came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. You know, when I was reading that the first time without studying it, just reading it, that sounded a pretty bit harsh to me, right? It's like, did he have good intentions? There you go. When I read it the first time without knowing, without really focusing and studying that, I thought, man, that's pretty harsh. I mean, all he was trying to do, the oxen stumbled, he's trying to stop it from falling, right? He's doing a good thing. Whew. Like Miss Rosalie was just saying, they were in error to begin with because that was not supposed to be transported by cart to begin with. That was supposed to be on poles, carried on the shoulders of the Kohathites. And so they were already in error to begin with. God has specifics because God knows better, right? And sometimes we, I don't know, I can't put myself in their position on that. But if I had to guess, at some point, some Kohathites and some other of the priests are like, hey guys, listen, y'all got carts. We ain't got carts. Can we just get a cart to carry this thing? It's pretty heavy. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Well, did God think it was a pretty big deal? Yes, He did. And here's a consequence of not doing things the way God specifically says to do them. And so that was just, I don't know if you've ever had that question when you read it or whatnot, but that's something that stood out to me is, well, why was God so just own it with that? Why did the anger of the Lord, strike this guy dead for doing a good deed? Well, because number one, it never should have been, that situation should never have developed because they did not listen to what He told them to do. And that was a consequence. Yes, the holiest objects would have been carried by the Kohathites on the shoulders. Yes. Let's see. And so with that, at the dedication of the tabernacle, each of the 12 princes offered the same offering, which consisted of the following: 1 silver charger of 130 shekels weight, 1 silver bowl of 70 shekels weight, both of which were full of fine flour mingled with oil for a meal offering, 1 gold spoon of 10 shekels, weight full of incense, 1 bullock, 1 ram, and 1 lamb for a burnt offering, 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 lambs for a peace offering. The sacrifices were spread over 12 days. The last verse states that God spoke to Moses from the tabernacle as He had promised in Exodus 25 in verse 22. And so with that we move from that point to the lighting of the candlestick. In chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, we see here, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you arrange the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. And Aaron did so. He arranged the lamps to face toward the front of the lampstand, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now this workmanship of the lampstand was hammered gold. For its shaft to its flowers it was hammered work, according to the pattern which the Lord had shown Moses. So he made the lampstand. The lighting of the candlestick is repeated again in Exodus 40 and verse 25, with the addition that Aaron bore responsibility to keep the lamps burning. They had to keep burning, and that was Aaron's responsibility. Now, with everything that you've seen so far, do you think there was a premium? Do you think that there was an importance on keeping everything the way God wanted it kept? Absolutely there was. Now, what's interesting about this, when we look at, I'm going to go back for a second. When we look at the dedication here of the tabernacle, each group, each prince that represented a tribe, did they give what they wanted to give? Or did they give what was expected of them? Okay. Now, do you think some of the tribes would have wanted to give more? I would think maybe some would, right? Do you think some were more prosperous than possibly others? Of course, if you just go by data, did some tribes have more people in them than others? Yeah. So, some were probably had more possessions than others. But what you notice here is that each one gave the same exact thing. There was equality in their giving. And so when we think about that, the whole purpose here of these gifts, it suggests that all the tribes were equally important, whether they were large or they were small. The reason why each one gave the same thing was that there would be no partiality, no perceived weakness. They're all important, whether it's Judah with the biggest group or the smallest group. You're all equally important here. You all give the same thing. That's very important, because can partiality lead to strife? Absolutely, absolutely. There's an example of this, a classic example. If you'll turn over to Mark 10 with me. Mark 10, starting in verse 35. And then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory. Now, were they asking for something small here? What does it mean to sit on the right hand or the left hand? What does that mean? If the king is sitting in the center, okay, who normally sits to the right and who normally sits to the left? Pretty important people? Absolutely. Not just anybody gets to sit there, right? And so they were asking indirectly, whether they realized it or not, they were asking for partiality, right? In their eyes, they wanted the best places to sit. I don't think they fully understood. I think that was probably one of those things, we all naturally want to be close to the ones that we love. And, I think, the fact, we all know for a fact that they loved the Lord. But they were asking for something that number one, it was going to create, well, if Jesus would have said, yeah, you can have the right and you can have the left, what's going to happen with the other guys there? You think somebody's going to be upset about that? Were they given the same effort? Were they there with him the whole time? Yeah. They're there with him. They're walking these roads. They're doing the same thing these two were doing. It would have created strife too. They didn't really know what they were asking. My point is this. When we look at what they were given at this dedication, the fact that every group, whether they wanted to give more to God, it didn't matter. This right here made every group seem important. And that's important. Because when you get into partiality, it creates strife. And one of the worst things that can happen in the church, in a company, is to have strife going on within the group. Right? Okay. All right. So, then we get into in chapter 8, we get into the consecration of the Levites. The Levites were given to assist the priest in the service at the tabernacle. The service of their cleansing differs from that of the priest in Leviticus 8. The Levites were dedicated to the service of the Lord in a public ceremony. They were brought to the tabernacle. Water of purifying was sprinkled on them for cleansing. They were to shave their whole flesh and to wash their clothes so that they might be clean. After this was done, 2 young bullocks with a meal offering were brought for sacrifice to God, one for the sin offering and one for the burnt offering. With the whole congregation assembled, the Levites were presented to the service of God. The congregation paid their hands on their heads, and the Levites were symbolically waved before God as a sacrifice to Him. The Levites laid their hands on the head of the bullocks and then offered them up for a sin and burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites were thus consecrated to assist the priest in the service of the tabernacle, verses 14 and 15. They were dedicated to God in the place of the firstborn of the whole nation. Once dedicated, the Levites could assist in the service of God. The period of service for the Levites was from age 25 to 50. So a couple of things there to unpack there. And so in chapter 8, in verses 5 through 8, it dealt with the consecration of the Levites to the work that they had been set apart to do. Now we know about the Levites earlier. We know that they were not numbered in the census because they were different than everybody else. What was the really the biggest thing they could not do that everybody else could do? Are they going to war? Are they going to fight? No, they're not going to do those type of things. The Levites had a very special role. Okay, and that's why they were not included in the census. They were given to God in place of the firstborn of the nation. Why were they done that? Why were they given to God instead of the firstborn of the nation? In chapter 8 of Numbers, starting in verse 15. Let's see. Oh, that's probably why I'm in chapter 7. Starting in verse 15. After that, the Levites shall go and service the tabernacle of meeting, so you shall cleanse them and offer them like a wave offering, for they are wholly given to me from among the children of Israel. I have taken them for myself, instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of all the children of Israel. For all the firstborn among the children of Israel are mine, both male and beast. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified them to myself. I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn of the children of Israel. So why were they given to God in place of the firstborn? Because He saved the firstborn of Israel when He struck down all the firstborn of Egypt. Instead of asking for the eldest son from each Israelite family, God sanctified the Levites to serve Him in their place. In verse 19 of chapter 8, he goes on to say, and I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons from among the children of Israel to do the work for the children of Israel in the tabernacle of meeting, and to make atonement for the children of Israel, that there be no plague among the children of Israel when the children of Israel come near the sanctuary. And so the Levites, we see here that the Levites were given as a gift to Aaron and his sons. Yes. 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 Because he spared the firstborn of the Israelites during when He struck down the Egyptians. Yes. So what did the Levites have to do? They assisted the priest. They guarded the tabernacle. Now, why would you need someone to guard the tabernacle? Are people naturally curious? Now, you would think that after a couple of these examples that we went through, that would be enough to say, you know what? I ain't doing that. But y'all, we live in times where that ain't necessarily, common sense is not in large supply. Do you think that was the same issue back then? So if anyone this was such a big deal. One commentary said, if anybody who was unauthorized came in contact with the holy things, he would not only die, but the whole community would suffer. And so God would send a plague, God would send a punishment to the whole congregation. The whole community would suffer. And so did everyone have a buy-in into not letting this happen? Yes. So the Levites, one of their biggest jobs was basically protect this. Don't let anybody in. Somebody stumbling over here like they're curious. Go. Okay? You ain't getting close enough to make me have to live through a punishment here. Because there's one thing about it. God can punish, and He can punish severely. And people don't forget that. There's a lot of things in my life. I'm sure I've been complimented a lot throughout my life. I don't really remember the compliments, but you know what hangs with me? The lessons I learned from the punishments. I remember that. Let's go down to verses 23 through 26. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This is what pertains to the Levites. From 25 years old and above, one may enter to perform service in the work of the tabernacle of meeting, and at the age of 50 they must cease performing this work and shall work no more. They may minister with their brethren in the tabernacle of meeting to attend to needs, but they themselves shall do no work. Thus you shall do to the Levites according to their duties." And so we see here that per the instructions, they could begin at age 25. They could begin at age 25 and then retire at age 50. So why do you think only 25 years? Well, let's look at that for a second. Why 25? Why is 25 maybe a good starting point? Why not 20? Maturity. Okay, maturity. Now, granted, I would say you were probably way more mature at 25 back then than you are at 25 right now. Is that fair? So at 25, you have a good head on your shoulders, so to speak. Now, why do you think at age 50, because that seems pretty, because you got people today that work till they're 70. I know my dad's told me I ain't never going to stop working. Why do you think 50 was the cutoff point? Why do you think the Lord would maybe want that to be, hey, you're done? And 50 back then, y'all, would be like 70 right now. Okay? Yeah, if you look at how people had to travel back then, everything's people who have worked with their hands throughout their whole life, that takes a toll on your body. So 50 would have been a good stopping point. Now that they had to retire at age 50, that was not in question. It's not like at age 50 they say, "Can I stay another year?" You know what I mean? They could still do things. They still could help with different tasks. They just couldn't do what they did before that point. They couldn't take a lead role in those things. But they could still do small things. But they were largely out at that point. So 25 to 50 is the time in which they would serve. Let's see. In chapter 9, we go through the Passover ordinance. The Lord commanded Israel to observe the Passover as its first anniversary came. The regulations for observing it had to be modified in some respects due to their dwelling in tents. On the 14th day of the month, the ceremony was observed because some were unclean because of contact with the dead. Special provisions were made for observance of the Passover at the regular time because of being unclean from contact with the dead, or because he was on a journey. He was allowed to partake on the Passover on the 14th month of the second month. The Lord warned Israel not to allow the provision to be used by those who were willfully disobedient in observing the Passover, verse 13. The same ordinance provided for the Israelites was also applicable to the strangers who sojourned among them and who desired to observe the Passover. And so, let me get over to this page over here. There's something that was interesting in here I wanted to read. Here we go. The first Passover had been observed on the night before the Israelites began their exodus from Egypt. God sent the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, upon Egypt, but promised to save the Israelites. Each family was to put the blood of a lamb on the doorpost and lintel of their home. When God saw the blood, he passed over that house and did not kill the firstborn within it. The Passover feast commemorated that occasion and the release from captivity it secured. Instructions for keeping the Passover are found in Exodus 12 and 13 and are elaborated on in other parts in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Passover observed on the 14th day of the month, of the first month in the second year, would have been the second Passover celebrated by the Israelites and would have commemorated the first anniversary of their deliverance from Egypt. God said that those who were unclean or on a distant journey at the prescribed time for the Passover could keep it 1 month later. This time period would allow an unclean person to regain his ceremonial purity and a traveler to return home. However, the Lord added 2 conditions which had to be met in order for someone who missed the Passover to be accepted. First, he had to observe it properly, according to all the statutes of the Passover. The Passover lamb had to be eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. All of it had to be eaten and none of it left until morning. And he was not to break a bone of it. Second, he could not have deliberately missed observing the Passover. The person who simply neglected to observe the Passover was to be cut off from his people and would bear his sin. Cut off from his people should be taken to mean execution, divine execution, or excommunication. So, what we get here is that there's a prescribed time in which they were to observe this. Now, if something happens, somebody's ceremonial unclean, they can't partake of it. Somebody's caught in a journey, they couldn't get back in time. It's out of their hands. They could not get there to observe it. There was another time set forth in which they could. God is making an opportunity that all can be able to do this. With the only caveat is this: anyone that willfully does not do it, you in trouble. Now, so what does that speak to? Does that not speak about us from an individual standpoint on, do we want to honor God? Do we want to be there? Okay? Obviously, the penalty for neglect here, willful neglect, was that they were either to be, and there's different thoughts about this in different commentaries. I would say probably excommunication is probably the biggest one. Now, excommunication, why is that a serious thing? You're in a distant land, and you're away from people, which makes you a prime target for anybody who's got nefarious ideas. All right? You don't get the resources, you don't get the protection, you're on your own. And here's the worst thing, y'all: you're cut off from God. That's the worst thing. When you look at that, how serious this was, and you parallel that to us as Christians, when we do the same thing today, when we willfully neglect our relationship with God, is there a consequence? Yes. Excommunication from God. It's amazing how these two things parallel, ain't it? It's almost like you're repeating the same story. And so with it, it's really a lesson for us today.